In the months before he was charged with storming the Capitol, Doug Jensen was sharing conspiracy theories he'd consumed online. But it hadn't always been that way, says his brother, who recalls how he once posted the sort of family and vacation photos familiar to nearly all social media users. A world away, Wahab hadn't always spent his days immersed in jihadist teaching. The product of a wealthy Pakistani family and the youngest son of 4, he was into cars and video games, had his own motorcycle, even studied in Japan. No two ideologues are identical. No two groups are comprised of monolithic clones. No single light switch marks the shift to radicalism. The gulf between different kinds of extremists, in religious and political convictions, in desired world orders, in how deeply they embrace violence in the name of their cause, is as wide as it is obvious. But to dwell only on the differences obscures the similarities, not only in how people absorb extremist ideology but also in how they feed off grievances and mobilize to action. For any American who casts violent extremism as a foreign problem, the January 6 Capitol siege held up an uncomfortable mirror that showed the same conditions for fantastical thinking and politically motivated violence as any society.
The Associated Press set out to examine the paths and mechanics of radicalization through case studies on 2 continents, a 20-year-old man rescued from a Taliban training camp on Afghanistan's border, and an Iowa man whose brother watched him fall sway to nonsensical conspiracy theories and ultimately play a visible role in the mob of Donald Trump loyalists that stormed the Capitol. 2 places, 2 men, 2 very different stories as seen by 2 close relatives. But strip away the ideologies for a moment, says John Horgan, a researcher of violent extremism. Instead, look at the psychological processes, the pathways, the roots, the experiences. All of those things, Horgan says, tend to look far more similar than they are different. America met Doug Jensen via video that ricocheted across the internet, turning an officer into a hero and laying bare the mob mentality inside the Capitol that day. Jensen is the man in a dark stocking cap, a black Trust the Plan shirt over a hooded sweatshirt, front and center in a crowd of rioters chasing Eugene Goodman, a Capitol police officer, up 2 flights of stairs. One prominent picture shows him standing feet from an officer, arms spread wide, mouth agape. When it was all over, he'd tell the FBI that he was a true believer in QAnon, that he'd gone to Washington because Q and Trump had summoned all patriots, and that he'd expected to see Vice President Mike Pence arrested. He'd say he pushed his way to the front of the crowd because he wanted Q to get the credit for what was about to happen. He'd tell his brother the photos were staged, how the police had practically let him in through the front door, and that some officers even did selfies with the crowd. William Rath of Clarksville, Arkansas, had an unsettled feeling about that day even before the riot and says he cautioned his younger brother. "I said, if you go down there and you're going to do a peaceful thing, then that's fine. But I said keep your head down and don't be doing something stupid. I have friends that I speak to constantly that have conspiracy theories," Rath said, "but this was a shock to me more than anything, because I would not have thought this from my brother Doug, because he's a very good, hard-working family man and he has good values." Exactly who Jensen is, and how much knowledge he had of the world around him, depends on who's talking. A Justice Department memo that argued for Jensen's detention cites a criminal history and his eagerness to drive more than 1,000 miles to hear President Trump declare martial law, then to take it into his own hands when no proclamation happened. It notes that when the FBI questioned him, he said he'd gone to Washington because Q, the movement's amorphous voice, had forecast that the storm had arrived. His lawyer, Christopher Davis, countered in his own filing by essentially offering Jensen up as a dupe, a victim of numerous conspiracy theories and a committed family man whose initial devotion to QAnon was its stated mission to eliminate pedophiles from society. 6 months after the insurrection, the argument resonated with a judge who agreed to release Jensen on house arrest as his case moved forward. The judge, Timothy Kelly, cited a video in which Jensen referred to the Capitol building as the White House and said he didn't believe Jensen could have planned an attack in advance when he had no basic understanding of where he even was that day. Yet less than 2 months after he was released, Jensen was ordered back to jail for violating the conditions of his freedom. Though barred from accessing a cell phone, he watched a symposium sponsored by MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell that offered up false theories that the presidential election's outcome was changed by Chinese hackers. A federal officer making the first unannounced visit to Jensen found him in his garage using an iPhone to watch news from Rumble, a streaming platform popular with conservatives. Davis, who weeks earlier had asserted that his client feels deceived, recognizing that he bought into a pack of lies, likened his client's behavior this time to an addiction. The judge was unmoved. It's now clear that he has not experienced a transformation and that he continues to seek out those conspiracy theories that led to his dangerous conduct on January 6, Kelly said. I don't see any reason to believe that he has had the wake-up call that he needs. Precisely when and how Jensen came to absorb the conspiracies that led him to the Capitol is bewildering to Ralph, who says he took Jensen under his wing during a challenging childhood that included stays in foster care and now feels compelled, as his oldest living relative, to speak on his behalf. When Jensen was questioned by the FBI, according to an agent's testimony, he said for the last couple of years he'd return home from an 8-hour workday and consume information from QAnon. In the 4 months before the riot, the brothers communicated about QAnon as Jensen shared videos and other conspiracy-laden messages that he purported to find meaning in but that Ralph found suspect. It was a period rife with baseless theories, advanced on the internet and mainstream television, that an election conducted legitimately was somehow stolen in favor of Democrat Joe Biden. It was just out there. It is on the internet everywhere, Ralph says.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.